My So-Called Life is one of the most influential TV shows that nobody watched. Airing from 1994 to 95, it broke the mold of how teen dramas were made, especially with Rickie, a gay kid who struggled with bullying, finding love, and getting kicked out of his home. Rickie was a lifeline for queer kids of the 90s who felt like they were all alone. And even though ABC executives killed My So-Called Life after just one season, veterans of the show went on to leave their mark with shows like Buffy, Glee, Heartstopper, Love Victor, and lots more. So why is a one-season wonder from 30 years ago still having such a huge impact on TV today? This is the story of My So-Called Life, Rickie Vasquez, and how gay teens went from being TV outcasts to taking charge of their own stories. Getting My So-Called Life on the air involved a lot of bumps in the road, but you can avoid bumps on your skin thanks to this video's sponsor, Manscaped. I wish I'd known about Manscaped's products a few weeks ago when my old razor nearly caused a security incident at the airport. I was approaching the TSA checkpoint when I realized I was vibrating. The sound of a cheap travel razor that I'd packed deep in the bowels of a backpack, which had chosen this particular moment to turn itself on. I had to hastily unpack my entire luggage to get to the off switch, all of which could have been avoided if I'd instead brought Manscaped's Lawnmower 5.0. Its travel lock feature keeps the razor powered down until you truly want it, instead of surprising you and the TSA agent manhandling your packages. That's in addition to the lawnmower's dual shaving heads, the LED light, and the companion ear and nose trimmer. Head over to manscaped.com and use promo code MATTB to get 20% off a lawnmower plus free shipping, plus a package with manscaping gifts. And now, back to the story of Rickie Vasquez and My So-Called Life. Before we can talk about Rickie, first, we have to go back a few years to a show called Family. It was a primetime drama on ABC, produced by Aaron Spelling, about a suburban family navigating the turbulent 1970s. One of the characters on the show was a 14-year-old girl named Buddy, and she was the tomboy, tough, outspoken, still figuring herself out.
If you're going to the dance with Carl, aren't you going to need a dress?
A dress?
Two of the writers on the show were an up-and-coming team named Ed Zwick and Marshall Herskovitz, college friends who'd recently graduated, and they were miserable. Ed had always seen a lot of potential in the Buddy character. He and Marshall wanted to have her confront real teen issues, to talk like a real teenager would, and sometimes to be surly and mouth off at her parents. But every time they wrote dialogue for Buddy with the slightest bit of an edge, executives sent it back with a 3-letter note, N-O-B, meaning not our Buddy. They wanted the show's teen daughter to be written more polite, and Marshall couldn't push the issue too hard. This was their first serious job in Hollywood, and they didn't have the clout to argue with producers like Aaron Spelling, who was responsible for hits like Charlie's Angels and The Mod Squad. But Spelling's approach felt wrong to Ed and Marshall, who were both in their early 20s, not too far from their own teenage years. For now, they just shut up and did the job that they were hired to do. The Family lasted a few more years, and when it was canceled, Ed said it was the best thing that ever happened to him, because then he and Marshall were free to discover their own voices. It was probably also a relief for the actress who played Buddy, Christy McNichol. Years later, she came out as a lesbian and said that the pressure of her career and being closeted was so bad, she'd suffered a nervous breakdown. Eventually, she walked away from acting altogether, settled down with her partner Marty, and got involved with anti-bullying programs for queer youth. Ed and Marshall kept working their way up through the industry after Family, with work here and there on shows like Chips. They made a fascinating experimental TV movie called Special Bulletin, which depicted a terror attack as if it was a news report.
Emergency efforts continue in Charleston, South Carolina, where 3 days ago an atomic explosion destroyed the heart of the city.
But TV viewers weren't used to seeing that level of realism, and during the broadcast, TV stations were swamped with calls asking if it was real. Minor panic aside, they won 4 Emmys for Special Bulletin, and that opened the door for their next project, a TV series that debuted in 1987 on ABC, the same network that had balked at letting them write realistic dialogue for Family. Their next show was called 30-something, and it was about a group of baby boomers who'd lived through the sexual revolution in their teens, but were now in their 30s and starting to worry about settling down, getting a job, raising kids. A lot of the primetime dramas of the 1980s, like Dynasty and Falcon Crest, were all about fantasy, glamour, dramatic speeches.
It's burned. Is it? The champagne was obviously frozen in the bottle at some point. The caviar, I trust, is not burned. I really wouldn't know. This is Osotrova, and I prefer Petrosian Beluga.
But 30-something was more grounded. The characters were awkward. They talked like real people.
Am I allowed to have a relationship with someone who wears polyester shirts?
They're not even blends.
And they used the show to tackle issues that other shows might avoid. It even had recurring gay characters, which were super unusual for the time. That wound up causing some problems. When one episode showed 2 gay characters in bed, not even touching, advertisers fled. It wound up costing ABC $1.5 million. But despite that hiccup, 30-something was huge. It turned out boomers loved seeing a show about them, especially one that felt real. The word 30-something became a generational label, and it helped popularize a new genre of TV where friends just sit around and talk about their lives. According to the Museum of Broadcast Communications, without 30-something, we probably wouldn't have had Seinfeld 2 years later.
Get out!
But producing 30-something was exhausting. By season 4, Ed and Marshall were running on fumes. And they told ABC they wanted to move on. So did the ABC executives respond with compassion? No, they threatened to sue. So Ed and Marshall cut a deal with them. They could wrap up 30-something as long as they developed a new show, a replacement for ABC. So they started thinking about what that show could be. And that's when they came back to their idea with Family, 15 years earlier. How they'd wanted to make Buddy a realistic teen. Now, they had a chance to do it, to make the show they'd always wanted, centered around a teenage girl and her friends. But they knew they weren't the right people to write that. They needed a co-creator who could capture the voice of a teen girl. So they turned to a friend and colleague named Winnie Holtzman. Winnie had started her career as an actor and a sketch comedian and had seldom made any money at it. A friend suggested that she try writing. It turned out that's where her talent lay. It also probably didn't hurt that after she applied for and got into NYU's musical theater writing program, she got to train under folks like Stephen Sondheim. Winnie had written a few episodes of 30-something. Ed and Marshall liked her style, so they pitched their half-formed idea of a show to her. It would be based on a teen girl's diary entries, with her narrating in a voice that wasn't always reliable, describing the things that she thought but wouldn't say out loud.
And I remember thinking, well, that's a good idea until we think of a real idea. It just seems so, unformed.
Winnie started tinkering around with some ideas, but pretty soon she ran into writer's block. She couldn't nail the voice of the main character.
I was so desperate. I felt so blocked. And I thought, I need to be around teenagers.
She asked a friend who taught high school if she could shadow him, spend some time in a quasi-student teacher role. He said okay, and when Winnie showed up,
it unlocked my memories. Being in a hallway, hearing that bell, hearing the clang of the lockers.
Yes.
The main character of the show was starting to take shape. Her name was Angela. Angela's childhood best friend is a neighbor girl named Sharon, but as Angela's starting her sophomore year, she wants a change. She stops hanging out with Sharon and befriends a wild, rebellious girl named Rayanne. But Winnie didn't stop there. She wanted to flesh out Angela's world with more people.
Somehow it was very natural for me that new crowd had a gay friend.
Inspiration struck again when she was watching the documentary Paris is Burning. It's about ballroom culture in New York, especially focused on Black and Puerto Rican performers.
You own everything!
And Winnie wanted to bring a character like that to the show. A friend named Rickie who hangs out with the girls, wears makeup, dresses flamboyantly, and like everyone else, is struggling to figure himself out.
But I didn't even think of it with the word gay, to be honest with you, because I liked thinking of it more like somebody sexually ambiguous.
But that was going to be tough. This was the early 90s, and there were almost never queer teens on TV, especially in the core cast. It was a long-standing taboo, going back decades. In the early 60s, CBS made a pilot for a sitcom about an outgoing, assertive teenage girl played by actress Sheila Kuehl, who was, at the time, a closeted lesbian. But
Jim Aubrey, who was the president of CBS at the time, had seen the pilot and had said, that pilot's going nowhere because she's just too butch.
In the 1970s, the show Family had an episode with a gay teen, but it's treated like an unspeakable taboo.
It wasn't the first time I went to that bar.
Hey, what?
And it wasn't the second either.
I'd appreciate it if you leave, Doug.
Dad? Do you want me to leave too?
I don't care what you do.
That didn't change much in the 1980s. Gay teens on TV were treated as a crisis, like in the made-for-TV movie, What If I'm Gay?
Hey, I'm poisoned now. And I'm poisoning everyone around me. Can't you see that?
In 1990, there was a gay son on Wings who's depicted as an embarrassment to his dad.
Dad, I'm gay.
And in 1992, Ryan Philby played a gay teen on One Life to Live and said the controversy and backlash severely impacted his career and his relationship with his family.
I was, at the time, enrolled in Christian school, and the reaction, once I did take the job, was pretty serious.
ABC executives were nervous about Winnie's vision for Rickie. One called Winnie to tell her it was impossible. She'd wanted to show him putting on makeup, but that was too effeminate, they told her. Winnie pushed back. She pointed to figures that she felt were similar. Michael Jackson was recently on Oprah, and he wore makeup. Jay Davidson was a queer person of color in The Crying Game and won an Oscar. She told ABC, "These things you're worried about are already embraced by the public." And the executive backed down. They let Rickie be Rickie, but having a queer teen character on the show?
It was still really novel and uncharted and, threatening.
It also presented a big challenge when it came to casting.
I remember talking to the casting person and saying to her, I don't think this is going to be like, we can just call up some agents.
A lot of actors had simply never seen anyone like Rickie. Actors would show up to auditions ready to play the characters straight-laced and preppy. That wasn't what Winnie had written at all. And without an actor who truly understood Rickie, the character wouldn't work. Or worse, might come off as a phony, forced gay stereotype.
We're gonna have to, get creative about how to find this person.
And then, in walked a young actor named Wilson Cruz. His whole life, Wilson had dreamed of acting.
I knew pretty early on that I was going to be an actor or an artist of some sort, and that's what my soul was begging for.
As a kid, Wilson had begged his family to move from Michigan to California so he could go to auditions. But he wasn't having an easy time landing roles.
Let's face it, the industry wasn't developing young, gay, Latino people of color.
The only gigs he could get seen for were for a background part on Unsolved Mysteries, or for Spanish-language McDonald's commercials.
They didn't even have copy. They would give you an English version and then ask you to translate it.
His big break almost didn't happen. At the time, there was a bizarre sitcom on Fox called Great Scott. It starred a young Tobey Maguire before he was Spider-Man, and they were looking for some singers to play chorus boys. Wilson wanted to audition, but the show told his agent
they wouldn't see me because I wasn't white.
But amazingly, Wilson wouldn't take no for an answer. He found the casting agent, a woman named Sally Steiner.
And so I kind of stormed Sally Steiner's office and kind of begged her to see me, and she did. And she got me that part. She was like, "You're a freaking fighter, so come on."
Through that part, he was able to join the Screen Actors Guild and became a recurring character on Great Scott, which was almost immediately canceled because it was an absolutely bananas TV show.
Who's having a tea party now, Coach?
We don't have time to go into the whole story here, but I'm posting a bonus video over on Patreon all about Great Scott and the very surprising cast and crew that ranged from Tobey Maguire to Quark from Star Trek, Otho from Beetlejuice, and the lead singer from Devo with the thrash metal band Exodus. You can get that bonus video and dozens more over at patreon.com/mattbaum. After the Great Scott gig ended, Wilson came in to audition for Rickie, and he saw how the other actors were dressed.
They all had khakis and polos, and I was like, that kid would never be caught dead in a polo.
A lot of what Winnie had written for Rickie felt very familiar to Wilson. A closeted teen with a creative spark who was afraid of attracting negative attention.
I actually understood it to the point where I felt like somebody had been following me around high school.
Before the audition started, Wilson remembers telling the casting agent, "I just want you to know how incredibly important this would have been for me if I had seen this on TV when I was a kid." And then after the audition, the agent told him, "I was going to tell the writers and producers what you said, but I'm just going to have you tell them yourself." The part was his. The rest of the cast came together pretty smoothly too. For Angela, the lead character, they cast a young dancer named Claire Danes who had recently been on Law & Order. For Angela's love interest, Jordan Catalano, they found a moody model named Jared Leto, whose main job was mostly to lean against things and sulk. Playing Angela's mom, Patty, they cast Bess Armstrong, phenomenal actress who'd appeared in a ton of prestigious stage roles, and some less prestigious film roles. And with the pieces all coming together, they were soon ready to shoot the pilot. We'll talk about the details of the pilot in just a little bit, but it was a fast-paced, stressful shoot, especially for Wilson.
As a gay young person at the time, I felt like I couldn't mess this up. You know what I mean? I can't mess this up. it would have meant so much to me to see it. And I knew that there were going to be now millions of young gay and lesbian people watching the show who were going to be looking at it, wanting to see a piece of themselves.
Feeling all that weight on his shoulders, he made it through the shoot. It was a complicated show to film. Location shoots, night shoots, that scene in the girls' bathroom that had freaked out the executives at the network. And when it was all done,
ABC was basically had the reaction of, we don't know.
The vibe around the office was it was just too dark. And it is visually dark, but also it's got an edge that you rarely saw on teen shows back then. It was almost exactly the same criticism that Ed and Marshall had heard years earlier on Family. Not knowing if the pilot would get picked up was especially agonizing for the cast. Weeks went by, with Wilson and the rest of the actors not knowing if they were going to have a job. Then months went by. They'd been just on the brink of success, and now all they could do was wait. It almost exactly mirrors a line that's in the pilot.
Haven't you ever waited for anything?
Yeah, for my life to start.
But Winnie had a secret weapon. Her agent at CAA, one of the biggest and most powerful talent agencies in Hollywood. While ABC kept the project on hold, CAA arranged private screenings of the pilot for industry insiders, showing off how good it was. And word started to get around town. There was an amazing pilot, unlike anything else on TV, and it was sitting on hold because ABC executives were too dumb to know a good thing when they saw it. And then, finally, months after they'd wrapped filming, Wilson finally got the call with exciting news. They'd been picked up. They were going to series for 6 episodes. For now, ABC wouldn't commit to any more than that. They'd decide later if the show should get a full season. But for a struggling actor used to bit parts and flat-out rejection, that was better than nothing. This visibility would come with some risk, though. On one hand, Wilson wanted people to know that Rickie was a queer character being played by a queer actor. But at the time, being out in Hollywood was considered a career ender.
My agents at the time thought it was smart to not say much about my own personal story, but I let them know pretty quickly that that was not an option.
He insisted on being publicly out when he did interviews about the show. And that meant that at some point, his family would find out. So he made himself a promise.
I made a pact that if we got picked up, that I would come out to my parents. I told my mom first. It went okay.
But things didn't go so smoothly with his dad. It happened on Christmas Eve. There was a big family gathering. His dad noticed that Wilson hadn't brought a girlfriend. He'd brought a male friend from school. And after a few drinks, his dad confronted him in the bathroom.
I told my dad, and my dad threw me out of the house.
He was 19 years old, and he had nowhere to live. Production on the show wouldn't start for another 3 months, so he couldn't count on a steady income yet. So for a while, he slept in his car. When one of his co-stars, Devin Odessa, found out, she had him come stay on her couch. It was a rough period. About to become a TV star, and also homeless. Meanwhile, ABC got to work promoting the show. In their way. The early promos for My So-Called Life are bonkers. The network sets it up like a frothy, sexy teen romp.
Angela's in love. Something has happened between Jordan Carolina and me. Do we confront her?
Oh God, no. People think we did it.
I know.
And then, it premiered on August 25th, 1994. Quick summary, Angela Chase is 14 years old. She's starting 10th grade, and she wants a change.
So when Rayanne Graff told me my hair was holding me back, I had to listen. Because she wasn't just talking about my hair. She was talking about my life.
She stops hanging out with her childhood friend Sharon and starts hanging out with the weird kids, hippie Rayanne and her gay friend Rickie. Over the course of the pilot, we learn that Angela has a crush on a boy named Jordan Catalano.
I just like how he's always leaning against stuff. He leans great.
And in fact, everyone has a crush on Jordan Catalano.
Rickie, give us the male perspective.
Don't you love how he leans?
Rayanne and Rickie take Angela to a club. They get in some trouble. They're taken home by cops. But at least she manages to get Jordan's attention.
Hey, I know that girl.
It's a sweet little slice of life. Perfectly captures the feeling of wanting to grow up and not knowing how. Of crushes feeling like the most important thing in the world. And of discovering that adults don't have all the answers. What's most striking about the show is its realism for 1994. The dialogue was like how teens actually talked in the 90s.
Lately, I can't even look at my mother without wanting to stab her repeatedly.
The lighting looked like real lighting, not flat studio lights. And the most realistic aspect? The awkwardness.
This doesn't seem like a Friday.
It's Thursday.
Are you sure?
Well, yesterday was Wednesday, so... So that's how I know.
Oh.
For comparison, the most popular primetime teen show at that point was Beverly Hills 90210, another show produced by Aaron Spelling, and everyone on that show was beautiful, glamorous, suave, and extremely cool. My So-Called Life was an intentional rejection of that kind of show.
Most of the things that depicted adolescence, I think, were fundamentally exploitative in some way. It was only about sexuality, titillation, that sort of thing. And
on My So-Called Life, everybody fumbles. And of course, one of the major aspects that set it apart was Rickie. He's introduced early on as Rand's sidekick. We see him hanging out with the girls, throwing in funny quips now and then while he's putting on makeup, and that's about it. For the time being, we don't know much more about him, but there are a few hints at greater depth and problems. When they go to the club and get into some trouble, cops show up.
I gotta go.
He has to leave in a hurry because he can't let the cops find him. We don't know why yet, we just know that he has a reason to be afraid. And we see how uncomfortable adults are around him, especially Angela's mom, Patty.
I like your house.
Thank you. Who are you?
From the moment she meets Rickie, Patty is suspicious. It's tense.
Okay, I'm leaving now. Well, not the house, the room.
And then later on, when he's not there, she makes her dislike plain.
I find Rickie a little confusing.
Okay, so maybe he's bi. Who cares?
Bi?
It means bisexual.
He's bisexual?
In fact, she totally dismisses him.
How can he be bi anything? He's a child. He's obviously very confused.
No, he's not confused.
He wears eyeliner.
He does? He wears eyeliner?
But just the fact that there's a queer main character at all is a huge step forward. And after the pilot aired, the audience response was, well, just so-so. It got around 12 million viewers. That put it behind reruns of Home Improvement, Mad About You, and Martin. It was ranked 46th overall. But it was also watched by almost double the women who normally watched ABC in that time slot, and over triple the teens. And even if viewership was low, critics at least were amazed by the show, especially the realism. Season's first series a winner, wrote one critic. Great Danes makes My So-Called Life ring true, and My So-Called Life is no Blossom. It ranked especially high in the opinionation of teenagers. One told a reporter it was a relief to have a show that was more real than 90210 and Melrose Place. Audiences and critics were extra fascinated by Rickie. They called him compelling. They praised how Wilson captured Rickie's essence without making him a caricature. One focus group said they wanted a whole spin-off about him. And there was one critic who predicted that the romance to watch on the show would be between Rickie and Angela. So among those who watched the show, the response was generally pretty good. The main problem was that, at least at first, not enough people were watching. And there was one more problem with Rickie, one that was harder to spot back then. It's great that the character's there, but for the first few episodes, he's basically Rayanne's accessory, just there to agree with everyone else.
See, I can see it from your side, but I also see it from her side, and from my own side. I don't really have a side.
When you watch the first few episodes now, it seems like it's about to slip into the sassy gay best friend territory. Like Rickie's there, but doesn't have any depth. But that would soon change. Rickie's life gets a lot more complex in episode 3. We see that behind his snappy quips, he has a pretty rough time at school.
Hi, honey. Hey, go to hell.
Maybe later I have something for you. Is that perfume I smell?
You know you're boring, don't you?
He tries to put a brave face on it, but Angela sees the reality of Rickie's life. The reality of life for a lot of queer teens. I was a gay high school student in the 90s, and the bullying was constant. Some teachers cared, but most turned a blind eye. And asking for help, telling administrators how you're being targeted and why, could essentially mean outing yourself, which might make you a target for adults, too. So it's understandable that Rickie doesn't want to make too much of a fuss about what's going on. But then, early in the episode, a gun goes off at school. Nobody's hurt, but they're pretty shaken up. And the principal thinks Rickie's involved. He's determined to pin the incident on him.
What can you tell me, son, about Rickie Vasquez?
He goes here?
For context, in the 90s, school shootings were rare compared to today. Schools didn't have active shooter drills. A gun going off at school was shocking. In the episode, parents are outraged and frustrated that they don't know how to stop it from happening again. There's a lot of pressure to blame someone. It's remarkable how timely the dialogue feels even today.
But are you getting the guns out of school? Now, that's the only question that's important here.
Should I just send my daughter to school in a bulletproof vest every day? Or are you actually going to do something about the guns in the school? No.
The way people talk about guns in schools then is so similar to the anguish that people feel now. And it's exasperating that in the 30 years since this aired, the gun industry and the politicians that they pay off have made the problem so much worse. As the students talk about what happened, Rickie has a surprising take.
Maybe some people have guns for, like, to protect yourself. Maybe some people who have guns are like victims, too.
His position is that many students feel threatened and can't go to adults for help.
You're saying that if somebody's threatened, that it's okay for them to carry a gun in school? You don't think the school authorities can protect them?
Man, you don't know what goes on around here. Yes.
He wants people to know he understands wanting to take things into his own hands. And he's not alone. In real life, a few years after this episode aired, queer people in various cities started organizing groups called the Pink Pistols, basically gay gun clubs. Their slogan was "Armed gays don't get bashed." Now, I'm not saying that's a great solution, but if you can't trust authorities to protect you, it's not surprising you'd want to find a way to protect yourself. Angela gets worried about Rickie carrying a gun, and finally she confronts him when they're alone. He tells her the truth.
My cousin brought it in to sell it. And I got real mad at him for bringing a gun into school. And the next thing I knew, the thing fell out of the box and went off. And he peed in his pants and ran away.
The gun wasn't his after all. He just wanted people to think it was, so they'd be afraid of him. Then there's another surprise. He points out that Angela's concern for him is unexpected.
I always think of you as Rayanne's friend. I mean, like, you just think of me as someone who's just, you know, around.
And she realizes that's true. She hadn't given Rickie much thought before now. But after seeing him in real danger...
It's weird how something has to happen sometimes. To see how you actually feel about someone.
What makes this such a big deal is that it flips the trope that the show had been heading toward. The sassy gay best friend who's only there to serve the straight character's story. This scene puts the focus on Rickie. It gives him depth, shows him facing obstacles, making choices about how to deal with them. Plus, it shows a main character having empathy and caring for Rickie, not just as a funny side character, but as a real friend. Since Angela's the show's main point of view character, that guides the audience to feel empathy for him as well. Now, that's not to say that this one scene fixed gay TV tropes forever, but it was a huge step forward for gay teens on TV. And the show was just getting started. Rickie gets even more depth over the next few episodes. Most of the other characters are busy with crushes and dating and an upcoming dance, but Rickie's feeling left out. When he talks about it to a friend...
People pairing off into couples. Did we cover this? Was I absent that day? You know I was.
He tries to put a casual spin on it.
You going to the dance? Doubtful.
There are hints that he has crushes, like memorizing a cute boy's schedule.
You won't run into him. He has shop 5th period Mondays and Wednesdays, and he never cuts shop.
And getting nervous around another boy.
Cool vest.
Those little hints may seem pretty subtle compared to today's TV shows, but back then, just the suggestion that a teenager had a same-sex crush seemed like a big deal. Here's Todd Holland, who directed this episode.
We were, for the first time, going to see who he's looking at and why, and not just imply he's different, but show that his, he really is attracted to other guys. And that was very exciting to me.
But Rickie's still guarded about actually saying how he feels. Liking a boy is one thing, admitting to it is another. When Rickie's talking to Rayanne about the upcoming dance...
Why don't you ask him?
Shut up.
Well, isn't that who you really want to go with?
She's right, he does want to ask a boy to the dance, so why is he so scared for anyone to know? Well, for one thing, there's just normal teen shyness. But there's another, bigger issue. Back then, the idea of a same-sex couple at a school dance was super controversial. When it happened, it was often front-page news. One reason it was so rare is that a lot of schools banned gay couples at school dances. Mine did. And like Rickie, I figured it would be best if I skipped them, since the message seemed to be people like me weren't welcome. There were occasional challenges to those bans. In the 1980s, a student in Rhode Island sued his school for the right to bring a boy to the prom. He won, but it wasn't a great experience. Fearing violence, the school hired a bunch of cops to guard them at the prom, and even with that in place, they still had to put up with heckling from other students. And that points to another issue. Even if gay students were allowed to attend, it might not be safe for them to do so. Rickie already gets a lot of abuse. Simply acknowledging that he likes a boy could open him up to more. And showing up with one would be even riskier. Back then, if you were lucky, you might live close to an alternative prom. Independent, non-school sanctioned events that were safe for gay teens. One year, my friends and I drove clear across the state so we could go to a gay-friendly dance at a Unitarian Universalist church. It's where I met my first boyfriend, and that was great, but knowing that I had to go that far just for a normal teen dating experience, it was also a reminder of how isolated I was in my day-to-day life. So, no wonder Rickie feels the way that he does.
That I belong nowhere. With no one. That I don't fit.
But something unexpected happens at the dance. Rickie meets a girl who's also having a rough time. Her date uninvited her so he could ask out someone else. And while they're standing off to the side, both feeling all alone, and before long, the night winds up being a huge victory for both of them. Both arrive feeling lonely, but now they've each made a new friend. They're looking out for each other. They found their own way to have a good time. This scene stuck with me for years. My senior year, I remembered how even though Rickie didn't bring a date, he still had a good time at the dance. And after years of skipping my own dances, this scene is what motivated me to attend the last one of my senior year. And just like Rickie, I had a great time hanging out with the girls who were my friends. Being able to participate even a little in normal teenage stuff was super validating. For me in real life, and also for Rickie on this show. By the end of the episode, we see him starting to come out of his shell, discovering people might like him more than he thought. And Rickie definitely wants people to like him. He wants to be seen as a good friend. But a lot of people judge him without getting to know him first. Like Angela's mom, Patty.
I find Rickie a little confusing.
And then, one day after school, they're hanging out at Angela's. Rayanne's drinking, and she asks Rickie to hold her beer. The timing couldn't be worse.
You're drinking a beer at 4:30.
Patty's not thrilled.
Look, I will not tolerate, under no circumstances. There are certain rules.
Rickie takes the fall for Rayanne, but he's sure.
Now she hates me.
So she never liked you that much to start off with.
And he's not wrong. Patty's pretty unhappy about Angela hanging out with him.
I apologize deeply that our house cannot measure up to the joy of being at Rayanne's, where your friend Rickie can guzzle beer.
Things get even worse when Rayanne's dad sends her some money and she gets an absolutely terrible idea.
A party!
Once again, Rickie tries to be a good friend and help her. He hopes he can keep the party from going off the rails. So, how's it go?
You know, she's always like this, and she's always okay by the time it's over.
Rayanne overdoses, and she blacks out.
I've never seen her like this. I don't know what to do, Angela.
Rickie and Angela know things are bad, and they call the most responsible person they can think of.
Mommy, I really need you.
Patty swings into action.
Oh, what about drugs? I need names.
I know she took ecstasy.
How much?
I don't know. I think just like 2 hits. It looked like she was saving one.
Can you find me the one she was saving?
Patty winds up saving Rayanne's life. But Rickie's sure that now Patty hates him even more. In the waiting room of the hospital, he tries to explain how important Rayanne is to him.
Did you ever try to protect someone so much that it like hurt?
And that touches something in Patty. She cares about Angela the same way. It's why she was so protective about who her daughter hung out with. And that changes how Patty sees Rickie.
That wasn't your beer the other day, was it?
And she invites Rickie into her home.
How would you like to attend a very dull party?
This is a big moment for the characters and for the show. Just a few episodes earlier, we saw Angela realizing that she felt empathy for Rickie, seeing him not as a stereotype, but as a full person. And through her, guiding the audience to do the same. Now we see something similar with Patty. Looking past her assumptions about Rickie, realizing he's worth getting to know, worth trusting. Through her, the show's guiding parents and the audience to take a more nuanced look at gay teens, whether their own kids or their kids' friends. But Rickie is still having a rough time at school. Now it's not just other students bothering him. There's a new English teacher named Mr. Katimsky who is quickly becoming Ricky's nemesis. He keeps calling Ricky by his full name.
See ya, Enrique.
People don't call me Enrique except like my grandmother, and she's dead.
And he won't stop badgering him about joining the new drama club.
Here's the sign-up sheet.
That I'm not interested?
Oh, well, maybe you'll change your mind.
I'm positive I won't.
Katimsky's attempts to reach out to Ricky don't go well.
I'm an Enrique, too. Well, sort of. Well, Richard. It's not quite the same thing.
No. Richard would be Ricardo.
And Ricky is getting exasperated.
He didn't even see the difference between Enrique and Ricardo. Who's Enrique and Ricardo?
He's fed up.
He's driving me stark raving mad.
What is this guy's deal? It all comes down to a final confrontation where Ricky lets him have it about his name.
It's as simple as that, Enrique.
Stop calling me that. Why are you calling me that?
I'm sorry, I keep forgetting. It's just...
And then Katimsky says something that changes how Ricky sees him.
When I was in high school, I hated my name.
I don't hate my name. I just...
Oh, well, good. Nobody should hate who they are.
That hits Ricky in a way that he hadn't expected. It's not just about the name. Katimsky recognized something in Ricky and genuinely thought drama club could help. And this is definitely true to life. For closeted gay kids in the 90s, drama clubs were absolutely safe havens. It was a running joke that if your school wouldn't let you have a gay-straight alliance, you could join drama club instead. My senior year, I was president of both. And more recently, multiple studies have found that theater programs can be especially helpful for queer youth. Why is that? Well, for a couple of reasons. But one big one that research has pointed to is that the stage can be a safe place to try out new roles, new identities. A performance can be a sort of cover for expressing yourself in ways that you might be too shy to show in your day-to-day life. We actually see Mr. Katimsky leading a drama club exercise to help kids drop their shyness.
We're a drama club! Come on! Give me some drama!
And having a safe space like that where you can figure yourself out would probably do Ricky a lot of good. In the end, he signs up. While it might seem like Ricky's situation is starting to improve, things are about to take a turn for the worse. It happens in the Christmas episode. Here's how ABC advertises it.
Wow, the tree looks really great.
Even if you've never seen this show before.
How come we never go to church?
It's a wonderful life, too special to miss.
We saved you the angel.
An all-new My So-Called Life.
Looks nice, right? Wholesome story about a family going to church. And then here's how the episode begins. Ricky's uncle, who he lives with, has beaten him and thrown him out of the house on Christmas Eve. We don't know where Ricky's parents are, just they're not in his life. He has nowhere to go. He swings by Angela's to hang out. She sees he's got a black eye. She wants to help.
I don't think he has anywhere to go.
Did he say that?
No, I just have this feeling.
Patty's not sure.
Can't I just stay here for one night?
Honey, it's not our place. What if his parents are expecting him? What if...
To be fair, this is a lot to spring on a parent. She has no way of knowing how bad things actually are. And in Patty's world, she can always assume that parents are there for their kids. It simply doesn't occur to her that Ricky's parents might not be present, that his only family wants him gone. Ricky hears them talking about him and he doesn't want to impose, so...
Honey, having him stay here is not the answer.
Then what is the answer? Oh no. Ricky!
After he leaves, Angela's still worried. She asks Rayanne what's going on.
Ricky has this tendency to get beat up, and he doesn't always love talking about it.
The way that Rayanne's so casual about it is chilling, but it lets us know this isn't new. It's Ricky's reality. Other characters are a little more willing to talk about it, like Jordan. He sees Ricky freezing outside and understands.
My old man used to knock me around too.
He takes Ricky someplace at least somewhat safer than the street, a warehouse where a bunch of other unhoused people are camping. When Angela finds out, she's horrified. She tracks Ricky down and begs him to let her help.
Come on, you're staying at my house.
I'm not sponging off your family.
Shut up, it wouldn't be like that.
All she wants is for him to be safe.
Ricky, you can't be here. You can't. Tomorrow's Christmas Eve.
But he's too ashamed to be seen like this, too ashamed to accept help.
I mean, face it, you don't belong here.
You don't belong here either.
I can't talk about this, not with you!
Angela's at her wit's end. She tells her neighbor Brian about Rickie's situation, and her parents overhear. They feel bad too, and they're not sure what to do.
Never met his family. I mean, how on earth are we supposed to know what the situation is?
I know you're right.
They do want to help, but something's holding them back.
I think he does make you kind of uncomfortable.
What do you mean, because he wears makeup?
Patty realizes it'd be different if the neighbor kid Brian needed help.
I've known Brian Krakow since he was 5 years old.
I know, so have I. Now, all I'm asking is, should that make a difference?
Well, maybe not, but it does.
One of the big ironies of this episode is that Patty's been pushing for them to have a more religious Christmas.
I want you to come with us to church on Christmas Eve.
And now here's someone who has nowhere to sleep on Christmas Eve. She's hesitating about whether she should open her doors, at least for now. But Angela's parents know they have to do something. They decide to go to the police.
Now, we're here because
we want to, help.
And we thank you very much. Well, was there something else?
The cops barely care. And instead of helping, they raid the warehouse and take everyone into custody. We'll talk about why police sweeps are so harmful in just a minute. For now, when Angela finds out what Patty did, she's furious.
We had to do something. We couldn't just...
I can't believe this. What did you do?
It's an incredible scene, and incredible acting from Claire Danes. For a moment, she stops being the teenager. She feels more like the adult, and Patty like a kid. Angela tells Patty about a girl that she met in the camp.
You haven't even talked to her. I've talked to her. This girl, she could be me.
Oh, don't say that! She couldn't be you. How can you say that?
Because it's true.
Angela's right. Kids get thrown out or run away from home every day, even homes that seem like they're happy on the outside. And it terrifies Patty that it could happen to Angela, especially when Angela storms out of the house in a fury. Patty chases after her, but she can't find her. It's freezing. Patty doesn't know what to do. She's distraught. And then the girl that Angela met in the camp leads Patty to a church. There, Patty finds Rickie lighting candles. He's all alone, no family, no home. He sees her, goes in for a hug, and whispers something. It's so quiet you can't even hear it. But if you watch his lips, you can see that he says, "I want my mom," and Patty is there for him. Finally, there in the church, she sees this is someone who needs help, and it's the kind of help that she can give. Soon, Angela and the rest of the family find them, and Rickie comes home with them. This episode is a lot to digest, and I didn't even talk about the possible supernatural elements, but the most moving thing is how real the situation is for so many teens like Rickie. In 1993, a year before this aired, the year that Wilson Cruz was thrown out of his home in real life, one organization estimated that more than a third of unhoused teens were queer, despite being just 1/10 of the population. Then, and unfortunately still now, queer teens are much more likely to be kicked out of the house, more likely to be the victims of crime while unhoused, more likely to turn to survival sex work, more at risk for contracting HIV. Making the situation worse, in the 90s, there were very few services for homeless queer teens. Back then, coming out of the Reagan and Bush years, the federal government basically ignored the issue altogether. There was nothing. A handful of independent groups offered some help if you were lucky enough to live near a major city, but a far more common response was police sweeps like we see in this episode. And a lot of organizations that serve the unhoused agree. These do more harm than good. Sweeps rarely connect people with housing, instead of just scattering them. They separate people from food, cold weather gear, ID, medication, and they make it harder for social workers to find the people who need help. These days, queer youth homelessness is still a big problem. But the good news is that now at least there are federal programs designed specifically to deal with this issue, and to make sure that housing services don't discriminate against queer people. One major reason for that change was simply visibility. In the mid-90s, surveys showed most Americans were like Patty. They were uncomfortable about homosexuality. Most had never even had someone in their life come out to them. Queer issues were rarely brought up, and a topic like queer youth homelessness wasn't on most people's radar at all. And that's just one of the things that makes this episode so extraordinary. It brought the issue into millions of homes during the holidays, and it concludes with this message.
If you know a child who is missing and who wants to come home for the holidays, call the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children.
After this aired, Wilson experienced firsthand how powerful an episode like this could be.
The episode in which Rickie is thrown out of his house airs. 10-15 minutes pass, and my phone rings. And it's my dad.
And he says, I think it's about time we talked.
After the Christmas episode, Wilson and his father reunited. But on the show, Rickie's situation is still pretty tenuous. On the next episode, we see his family still won't let him come home, and he feels awkward living with the Chases.
Well, we have to try to contact his family, or he has to. I mean, he can't just stay here forever.
Not wanting to overstay his welcome, he makes an excuse and leaves.
Ricky, we want to talk to your aunt and uncle.
No, I know. And she's been meaning to call and thank you or whatever, but I think she's a little embarrassed. So thank you for everything.
Now, there is someone else who wants to help, but can't. And that's the English teacher, Mr. Katimsky. He can see something's wrong. During drama rehearsal, he overhears Rickie on the phone.
I mean, because they wouldn't just move without telling me. People don't just do that. I mean, because that would be crazy.
They moved away without him. Mr. Katimsky desperately wants to help, but he's also hesitant. He can't get too involved. Instead, he goes to a guidance counselor. That's Winnie Holtzman in a cameo, and he tries to get her to intervene. There is some good news.
The place I'm thinking of for you is called Pride House.
And is that, what kind of a place is that?
It's great. It's almost like a family.
But also some bad news.
Listen, a place like Pride House has a waiting list. Even if I pull every string known to man, it's going to take a few weeks to get him in.
What is he supposed to do tonight?
Well, it's not a perfect system.
Best they can offer is a group shelter. But...
Hey, you. Hey, I'm talking to you.
It's clearly not a safe place for him. This is one more topic that was unusual for TV shows to address, the challenges of finding housing specifically for queer youth. And unfortunately, Rickie's situation is pretty true to life. For a lot of queer teens, if they're able to find a shelter at all, it may not be stable. And they may run into homophobic staff or clients who make it actively dangerous. So it's no wonder Rickie runs away from the shelter. By now, Mr. Katimsky is getting desperate to help him. He tries to track Rickie down. He winds up at the Chases.
Don't you realize this boy was under your roof like that? Who are you?
But Rickie told us...
I don't care what he told you. Now, why did you believe?
It doesn't go great.
Gee whiz, I'm really sorry.
No, don't. No, you're absolutely right. We should have...
Who are you?
No.
If this is so important to him, what is stopping Mr. Katimsky from offering his own place? We're about to find out. Rickie calls Katimsky that night. He's on the street, as desperate for help as Katimsky is to provide it.
Enrique, listen. Never mind. We can talk about it tomorrow.
But Rickie can't bring himself to ask, and Katimsky stops himself from offering. And after they hang up, we finally see why.
So, what's gonna happen to him? The kid.
Mr. Katimsky is gay.
If we did take him in, if it got out, you realize what people could make of it? I'd lose my job, be crucified.
But later that night, Rickie shows up at his door.
Your address was in the phone book.
Mr. Katimsky can't bring himself to turn him away. And for now at least, Rickie's off the street with a safe place to live. But this also introduces a big new problem. Mr. Katimsky is right about how risky this is. In the 90s, gay teachers were a huge controversy. Often they were hounded out of their jobs. The same year this aired, a teacher in Missouri named Rodney Wilson came out to his students. It was during a lesson on the Holocaust, and he pointed out that the Nazis would have targeted him for being gay. Coming out made him the only out LGBTQ high school teacher in the entire state of Missouri at the time. And sure enough, he became a target for conservatives who fought to get him fired. The mere existence of a gay teacher drew front-page news headlines like Taboo Teaching and Secret Lives, Private Fears.
A gay teacher speaks out tonight after he's verbally vilified at a school board meeting.
An openly gay teacher is at the center of a curriculum controversy that involves the role of gays and lesbians in history.
5 months ago, 29-year-old Rodney Wilson shocked a lot of people when he told some of his classes he's gay.
Back then, conservatives claimed queer teachers were a threat to kids.
We do not need this in our school. This is not quality education, and this has no value at all for our children.
And frustratingly, the rhetoric today is still very much the same.
We do not believe that any LGBTQRSTUV should be taught in any of our schools for any of our students. If that is the case, then you better have much about our Lord Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior.
Fortunately, in Rodney Wilson's case in Missouri, the local school board stood up for him and granted him tenure. Not only could he keep his job, But he and some colleagues founded National LGBTQ History Month, which is still observed in October and is expanded internationally. But a lot of queer teachers weren't so lucky. Over the last few decades, multiple states have either considered or passed laws that authorize schools to fire teachers for engaging in homosexual conduct. And this isn't some vestige of the past. Earlier this year, when a 5th grade teacher in Spokane, Washington came out, so many parents complained that the school district paid him to resign. Last year, a school in Houston fired a teacher because she went to a drag show on her own time. Hounding teachers out of their jobs doesn't only hurt them, it hurts the kids too. We already talked about how queer kids are more likely to face isolation and loneliness. And one of the ways to reduce that is by making sure they have adults in their lives who understand what they're going through, who get their unique issues, who can look out for them. Safe, positive role models. On My So-Called Life, Rickie's fortunate to have that. But on the show and in real life, a teacher simply standing up for young people like Rickie could risk outing them both, attracting dangerous attention. And in a case like Rickie's, that could mean forcing him back out onto the street again. For the time being, Rickie now has a safe place to live, and friends who like him. But he still has a problem. He doesn't like himself. More specifically, Rickie wishes he was straight. And he sees what he thinks is a chance to fix himself with help from Delia, the girl that he met at the dance. She's been giving Rickie some attention.
She really likes you.
Do you realize how much easier my life would be if I could just like her back?
And he thinks maybe he should try.
This could be my chance to be straight.
This is another experience that is deeply relatable to a lot of queer people. Feeling convinced there's something wrong with who you like and trying to date someone you should be attracted to in the hopes that you can fix yourself. At a drama club meeting, Rickie tries to ask her out.
Maybe we should, go somewhere sometime.
Okay.
Because, I really think we'd be good together.
Delia can't believe her luck. A boy she likes is asking her out. But she has to clear something up first.
But, you're gay, right?
You can almost hear the sound of screeching tires and a crash in Rickie's head. That is a terrifying question to be asked. Until now, we've never heard him identify one way or the other.
It's okay.
That came out so rude.
No, see, I try not to, I don't like,
But then, finally...
Yeah. I'm gay.
I have so many emotions watching this scene. And most of all, I'm proud of Rickie for having the courage to answer honestly. It's a moment that mirrors what Wilson went through in real life, promising himself that if he was asked, he'd answer the truth, even knowing how negative the reaction would be. So, how does Delia react?
I mean, I've actually never said it out loud.
I feel kind of honored.
That's pretty much the best response she could have. She's happy for him, glad he was honest. I know firsthand how scary it is to face that question. I went through it many times myself in high school. But it was a lot easier for me to be honest when I was asked because I saw other people do it. People like Rickie on the show and people like Wilson Cruz in real life.
I really believed it would be more powerful if young people understood the person playing that role stood behind that story.
Another great thing about this scene, in real life, a friendship like this, straight girl, gay boy, is probably familiar to a lot of people. But until this point, it was rare to see it on screen. It wasn't until a few years later that it started popping up in movies like Object of My Affection, and then on TV with Will and Grace. By the late 90s, this kind of friendship was the subject of trend pieces. Hey, can you believe straight women and gay men get along well together? Who knew? But here's My So-Called Life, years earlier, weaving it into the show. So, as the season comes to a close, we see Rickie in a very different place from where he started. He has depth, he has a safe place to live, he has friends who accept him, he accepts himself. It's a really exciting, groundbreaking character arc, and there are so many places it could go from here. But there's a problem. Throughout season 1, the ratings have been climbing, but they were still in the 10 million range, which for the time was not great. Critics were calling it brilliant, but by the season finale, out of 138 primetime shows, My So-Called Life was ranked 114, getting the same viewership as the reboot of Get Smart, and lower numbers than a rerun of the movie Every Which Way But Loose. Another problem was raised by ABC's sales department.
They liked it very much, but they felt they couldn't sell it, and the advertisers weren't that interested in it.
According to the network, My So-Called Life was advertiser poison because of who was watching.
Networks did not understand that you could sell to adolescent girls. Advertisers did not understand that you could sell to adolescent girls. They didn't care about them.
So after the season finale, ABC put the show in the worst possible place. Hiatus. A sort of purgatory, where you don't know if it's been canceled or renewed. It's the same kind of liminal state that they were in after shooting the pilot. Still, 10 million viewers is not nothing, and die-hard fans started organizing to save it. Fans had rescued shows in the past, often with campaigns organized by women, like for Star Trek, or for shows about women, like Cagney and Lacey, Designing Women. What was unique about this campaign is that it was organized in cyberspace. At the time, the internet was still quite new to most people. About half of America had never even heard of it.
And they call it the World Wide Web. You can email anyone.
What the hell is email?
But thousands of people swarmed AOL and CompuServe message boards and swamped ABC's email address. Yes, the one email address for the entire ABC network. They called their campaign Operation Life Support, and nobody had ever seen anything like it. Reporters called their message board an electronic pamphlet. ABC executives were stunned, but the network still wouldn't commit one way or the other. And as weeks and months dragged on, the cast and crew couldn't wait around. They needed work. The cast were getting offers for other projects, and as working actors, they understandably took them. And then, eventually, ABC announced their upcoming fall lineup, and My So-Called Life wasn't on the list.
They basically killed us in dribs and drabs. I mean, we ended up doing 19 episodes, and I think it took us literally 2.5 years from the time we did the pilot to when we did the final episode. It was painful.
It was at least a relief to have an answer, but it was also a huge bummer that the show was over, and that was the end of its story. Except, it wasn't the end. My So-Called Life was about to get a second life. Around this time, MTV was mostly known for music videos, but they were looking to expand. They didn't have a ton of money to make their own shows, so a lot of their early original programming was pretty cheap. A home shopping show, a workout show, an unscripted soap opera called The Real World. I'll be talking about that more in another video. When My So-Called Life wrapped up, MTV approached ABC about airing it in reruns. ABC didn't think it was worth much, so they said, sure, show it as much as you want. And boy, did they.
MTV made the best deal for MTV in the history of deals.
They started with the My So-Called Life marathon. That performed well, so MTV ran another, and another, and another.
It was sort of My So-Called Life all the time. They must run it several times a day for several years.
MTV turned out to be the perfect place for the show.
Young people were so tuned into the channel. You know, from the moment they got home from school, MTV was on. It was setting the agenda.
Now, these characters were in front of viewers who were hungry for realistic teens on TV. Teenage viewers that ABC thought no advertisers wanted. And there, finally, they found their big audience. When you talk to a fan of the show today, chances are they didn't catch the full run on ABC, but they probably saw it over and over on MTV. And because there was nothing else like it, the following that the show picked up was especially devoted.
I can't even tell you how many times I've gotten a letter, you know, from somebody who said, you know, that show saved my life.
And this was a huge boost for the cast. After those MTV marathons, they shot from minor roles to stardom. Claire Danes was in Romeo and Juliet, or maybe Romeo plus Juliet, nobody really knows how to say it. Jared Leto was in How to Make an American Quilt. Wilson Cruz was Angel in Rent.
It literally changed me. I mean, plucked out of obscurity.
And whatever happened to Winnie Holtzman? Well, after My So-Called Life, she began a new project, adapting a novel into a stage musical. Winnie's stage adaptation was well received, and a few years later, she wrote a screenplay for a film version, and now that film is due to come out later this year. The musical Wicked.
It's the wizard who should be afraid of me.
You can also find fingerprints of My So-Called Life all over television in the years that followed. The writers and directors behind My So-Called Life went on to work on Party of Five, Friday Night Lights, Gilmore Girls, Buffy, The O.C., Veronica Mars, Glee, Riverdale, Yellow Jackets, Gilded Age, Love, Victor.
For a show that only had 18 episodes, it's had a huge effect on an entire generation.
Shows that presented teenage life with lots more depth than what came before, and crucially, included tons of rich, complex, queer characters in the main cast. For example, Justin on Ugly Betty.
I think that the character that Mark Indelicato plays on Ugly Betty right now is a stepson to Rickie Vasquez, in the same time slot, by the way, on the same network.
Without My So-Called Life and Rickie Vasquez, there's a good chance we wouldn't have any of the leading queer teen characters that we see today.
I think what Wilson did was he put a face to every queer person that's ever been an adolescent, that's ever wanted to fit in and grapple with the idea that their lives would be different.
I loved that show. It's unbelievable that was only on for a season.
I can't believe that.
It was so realistic.
And for a sign of just how much TV has changed, in the 90s, shows had to dance delicately around controversial topics like Rickie's gay English teacher, had to be careful about how much they even said out loud. And today, we have a show where a gay English teacher directly talks about being a gay English teacher on a show called English Teacher.
A non-binary person is somebody who does not identify as male or female.
When you look at where TV was and how much it's changed, Rickie Vasquez is the dividing line. That's the point when queer teens got to tell their own stories, queer viewers got to see their stories told, and straight viewers were guided to feel empathy for them. More than just a good TV show for the time, it was a TV show that made an impact on the shows we still watch today and on audiences for the last 30 years.
The greatest gift that acting offers is to kind of deepen our empathy. I think that's true for the performer and it's true for the audience. It's an exercise in compassion.
And of course, My So-Called Life completely changed everything for Wilson Cruz.
I can't talk about the show without crying. I helped bring Rickie to life, but in a very poetic way, he brought me to life in many ways.
Wilson saw that with these more prominent roles, he had a platform, and he used it for activism. As Grand Marshal in Pride Parades, as a speaker at graduations, on the board of directors of GLAAD, and he continues to appear in groundbreaking queer roles, most recently as one of the first openly gay characters on Star Trek.
You may not care about you, but I do.
And he still hears about Rickie's impact.
There is not a day that goes by that I don't get a message from somebody who says their life was changed because of Rickie. And I wonder sometimes, how many fathers turned to their sons or daughters and said, I think it's time for us to talk.
And Wilson says the 30 years since the show haven't only been a happy, successful journey for him. When we meet Rickie Vasquez, he says he's waiting for his life to begin. And Wilson says that when he thinks about where Rickie might be today,
I think that Rickie Vasquez in some parallel universe, I think he is the go-to fashion designer at the Met Gala. I think he hobnobs with stars. I think everyone at Liberty High School cannot believe that the most famous person that came out of their class is Rickie Vasquez. That's what I think. And he's living in New York, right there.
Now, there's so much more to say about what makes My So-Called Life special. And whether you've never seen it before, or if you're a longtime fan, I hope you'll join me and some very special guests as we dive even further into the series on a weekly podcast called Matt's SoCast Pod. We're going through the show episode by episode with a ton of fantastic guests. There's queer entertainment superstar Ben de la Creme, the author of an upcoming book about My So-Called Life, So Beautiful It Hurts, Aaron Berman, co-host of My So-Called Life podcast, The Boiler Room, Kristen Russo, television writer and comedian, Guy Branum, movie critic and author of Hollywood Pride, Alonzo Duralde, From You're Wrong About and If Books Could Kill, Michael Hobbs, and so many more writers, actors, and friends. Some of my guests are watching it for the first time, some have been in love with the show for 30 years, and I can't wait for you to join us, talking about the characters, the fashion, and our own mortifying high school stories. You can find Matt's SoCast Pod wherever you listen to podcasts. And there are tons of great stories about My So-Called Life that I just didn't have room for in this video, so I'm putting them into bonus videos over on Patreon. Head over to Patreon to see more of Wilson's early TV role on the incredibly surreal Tobey Maguire sitcom Great Scott, or you can see the story of how the head of CBS was convinced that the network would be doomed by a teenage lesbian named Zelda, plus hours and hours more. All of those bonus videos are at patreon.com/mattbaum. Huge thanks to everyone who makes these videos possible with your support. Thanks to Galeka for hosting an interview with Wilson Cruz. And now, if you'll excuse me, I'm late for cheerleading tryouts.
Corkscrew!